The sound of a small bell rang out across the cracked asphalt of the lot behind Hamel Market, and then it stopped. It did not fade the way bells are supposed to fade. It cut off, as if someone had caught it mid-ring and pressed it silent against the palm of their hand. A 7-year-old girl named Saurin Jeo stood beside a bicycle that was not quite her size anymore, but had been her size once, back when her father was still alive. The bicycle was pale blue with a white basket attached to the handlebars, and there was a small silver bell screwed into the right grip. It had been her 7th birthday present. Now, 22 months later, Soren was selling it. The boy who had agreed to buy the bicycle was a teenager with a hooded sweatshirt. He counted $38 twice in front of her because she had asked him to. That was the price they had agreed to after she had posted a handwritten sign on the community board outside the laundromat. The sign had said, in blue marker, "One good bicycle for sale. Works perfect. $38 please." And under that, in smaller letters, "My mom is sick." Soren took the money and folded it into her pocket. She did not cry. She had promised herself that morning that she would not cry in front of a stranger. Her mother had always said that crying in front of strangers made you smaller in their eyes, and Soren did not want to be small today. The teenager swung his leg over the bicycle and rode away, the silver bell ringing faintly with every bump in the pavement until the sound disappeared around the corner. Soren stood in the empty lot for a full minute afterward. Her eyes needed time to accept that the bicycle was gone. Then she turned and walked toward Hemel Market at the end of the block. She did not see the man across the street, the man who had been standing beside a long black sedan for the last 11 minutes, holding an unlit cigarette between two fingers, the way a person holds something they have forgotten they are holding. The man who had watched the entire transaction from beginning to end without moving. The neighborhood was called Bansong Flats, and it sat in the southern pocket of the city like a bruise that had not healed correctly. It had been built in the late 1970s as affordable housing for Korean immigrants who had come to work in the textile factories along the river. Then the factories had closed, and the sidewalks had quieted. By this autumn, Bansong Flats was a neighborhood of long shadows. The storefronts were half empty. The sky was the color of old paper. It was a Tuesday in late October, and the first real cold of the season had arrived the night before. Soren walked with her hands in her pockets and her shoulders pulled up around her ears. Her coat was too thin, a pink windbreaker that had belonged to a cousin she had only met twice. Her shoes were sneakers with the soles beginning to peel at the toes. Her hair had been brushed that morning by her mother, brushed slowly, because her mother's hands had been shaking and her mother had apologized twice for the shaking, and Saurin had said, "It is okay, Mommy. You are doing good." That was the thing about Saurin Gio. She had learned very early to be the one who said, "It is okay." She had learned it sitting on the floor of the hospital hallway at 4 years old when her father had gone in and not come out. She had learned it every morning since, when her mother took the pills that helped and the pills that did not help. Her mother's name was Doha Jeo. She was 32 years old. She had been a piano teacher once, before her husband died, before the grief had moved into her body and set up a small dark room inside her chest that had never been cleaned out. For the last year she had been unable to work. Today she was lying on the couch in their one-bedroom apartment on the 4th floor, and she had not eaten in 2.5 days. But Saurin had known. Saurin always knew. The man across the street finally moved. He opened the driver's side door of the black sedan, placed the unlit cigarette into the ashtray, and closed the door. Then he walked. His name was Junseo Ri, and he was 63 years old, and he had been the head of the Hyundai organization for the last 19 years. The organization did not advertise itself. It existed in the margins of 3 cities, operating through restaurants and laundromats and small import businesses. The people who needed to know about it knew about it, and the people who did not need to know went their whole lives without ever hearing the name. Junseo-ri was not a large man. He was average height, slender, with silver hair cut close to his scalp, and a face that had settled into itself the way faces do after a certain number of years of careful control. He wore a dark wool coat over a charcoal suit. If you passed him on the street, you would think he was a retired banker or a professor emeritus. He did not look dangerous. That was the point. The men who survived in his business were the ones who looked like they were waiting for a bus. He crossed the street and walked at a pace slower than Sarin's, keeping a distance of 30 feet. He stopped outside Hemel Market and pretended to read a flyer about a missing cat. Through the glass he could see Sorin inside, standing at the counter on her tiptoes, handing the folded bills to the old man who owned the store. The old man was called Cho. Junseo-ri had known him for 21 years. Cho nodded slowly and began ringing up the items. A small bag of rice, a carton of eggs, a jar of kimchi, a single red apple, a box of the cheapest crackers on the shelf, a bottle of children's fever reducer. Junseo watched her carry the bag out with both arms wrapped around it, the weight of it pulling her forward. She passed him without noticing, and then he heard it. Sarin had stopped at the corner. She had set the grocery bag down on the curb because it was too heavy to carry the full distance without a rest. She was standing there catching her breath, her small hands flexing at her sides, and she was talking to herself, quietly, the way children do when they think no one is listening. "It is okay," she was whispering. "It is okay. Mommy will eat tonight. I can get the bicycle back someday. Maybe in the summer. Maybe when she is better. I can save. It is okay. Do not cry. Do not cry. Do not cry." Junseo-ri stood on the sidewalk 30 feet behind her, and he did not move, and he did not breathe. Because the sound of a 7-year-old child telling herself not to cry was a sound he had heard before, in another country, in another decade, in the voice of a boy he had once been, standing in the courtyard of a house in Busan in the autumn of 1970, whispering the same 3 words to himself over and over after his older sister had sold her jade hairpin to buy medicine for their mother. He had not thought about that courtyard in 40 years. He had built a life specifically designed to ensure he would never have to think about it again. But the wind moves, the way the wind moves. The past arrives, when it arrives. And a man who had built his reputation on silence and distance was standing now on a cracked sidewalk in Bansong Flats, listening to a little girl whisper into a paper grocery bag. Even a man like Junseo-ri could not walk past this. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and took out his phone. He typed 3 words and sent them to a man named Tae-san, who had worked for him for 14 years and had never once asked a question that was not necessary. Find the boy. Then he put the phone away, and he watched Saorin Gio pick up the grocery bag and begin walking again. And he understood, with the cold, total clarity of a man who had spent his entire life learning to see what other people missed, that this was not going to be a story about a bicycle. This was going to be a story about whoever had put her in a position where she had to sell it. The apartment was on the 4th floor, and the stairs smelled like old cooking oil and rain. Soren climbed them slowly, shifting the grocery bag from one arm to the other on every landing. At the 4th floor, she stopped and listened at her own door before she opened it. She would press her ear against the painted metal and listen for the sound of her mother breathing, and if she heard it, she would know that the day was not going to be one of the worst days. Today, she heard it. Slow and shallow, but there. She opened the door with her key. The apartment was 1 bedroom with a narrow living room and a kitchen the size of a closet. The walls had been white once. Now they were the color of paper left out in the sun. There was a small upright piano against the far wall that had not been played in 14 months, and on top of the piano sat a framed photograph of a man with kind eyes and a yellow tie. The man in the photograph had been dead for 3.5 years. Doha Jo was on the couch under a green wool blanket. Her eyes were open and fixed on the ceiling. Her hair was pulled back in a loose braid that Sauron had done for her that morning. Sauron unpacked each item with the seriousness of a surgeon laying out instruments. The rice went into the cupboard. The eggs went into the refrigerator. The apple she washed and set on a small blue plate. The bottle of fever reducer she placed on the coffee table next to the couch. Then she knelt down beside her mother. "I got food, Mommy. I got eggs." Doha turned her head slowly on the pillow. When she saw Sauron, her eyes focused. "Sauron, baby." Her voice was thin. "Where did you get the money?" Sauron had rehearsed the answer all the way up the stairs. She had decided she would say the school had given her a lunch card with extra credit. But when she opened her mouth, the lie did not come out. "I sold my bicycle, Mommy, to a boy. He gave me $38. That is how I bought the food." Doha closed her eyes. 2 tears slid down the sides of her face into her hair. "Do not cry, Mommy," Soren whispered. "I can get it back. Maybe in the summer." The boy was not mean. "So it is like the bicycle is just at summer camp for a while. So it is okay." Doha reached out a thin hand and put it on the top of Sauron's head. "I am so sorry. I am so sorry. I am so sorry." That was the ritual. Every night before Doha went to sleep, and every morning when she woke up, she would put her hand on Sauron's head and apologize. She had been doing it for 11 months. She apologized for being sick, for the bills, for the way her hands shook. She apologized for Daniel, the man in the photograph, because she believed that if she had been a better wife, he would not have had the heart attack at 34. She apologized for the piano because the piano had been her job and she could no longer play it. And Sauron would always answer the same way. She would put her small hand over her mother's hand and she would say, "It is okay, Mommy. You are doing good." She went into the kitchen and she cracked 3 eggs into the small frying pan her father had bought at a garage sale the year before he died. She scrambled them the way he had taught her. She slid the eggs onto a plate and set the plate on the coffee table along with a cup of warm water. Doha pushed herself upright. She ate slowly with the fork held in a hand that trembled visibly. Sauron sat on the floor beside her and watched. Doha ate about half of what was on the plate. Then she set the fork down. "You eat the rest, baby." "I already ate at school," Sauron said. This was a lie. Sauron had not eaten lunch in 5 days. Her school lunch account had gone into the negative $11 3 weeks ago, and the cafeteria had started giving her the cold cheese sandwich they gave to children whose accounts were in arrears. Doha was too tired to press her, and Sauron ate the rest of the eggs herself, chewing slowly so her mother would not see how hungry she was. To understand how the Geo family had arrived at this particular Tuesday, you had to go back to a night in February of the previous year. It had been raining. Sauron had woken to the sound of her mother's voice coming from the kitchen, a flat, thin tone that sounded like a piece of paper being torn very slowly. Doha was on the phone with a man named Minho Guak. Minho Guak was their landlord. He was also, as Sauron would come to understand, a man who owned 7 buildings in Bansong Flats and had a method of running them that involved knowing exactly how much his tenants could pay and then charging them slightly more than that. The call had been about the rent. Daniel's life insurance had run out. Doha's savings had run out. The piano lessons had been canceled one by one as her students' families had moved away, because Doha had missed 3 weeks of lessons after the funeral, and the parents had not waited for her to come back. By that February, Doha had missed 2 months of rent. Minho Guak had called to inform her that the eviction notice would be delivered in the morning, unless she could pay him $1,500 in cash by the end of the week. He had offered a second option. He had said he sometimes helped tenants who were struggling by offering them small loans. The weekly interest rate he quoted was 40%. Doha had taken the loan. She had not known what else to do. And Sorin, standing in the doorway of the kitchen in her pajamas, had heard her mother say. Yes, I will take it. Yes. Thank you. Yes. I understand. That had been the beginning. The debt had grown. Minho Guak had let it compound for 9 months, and then he had begun to come to the apartment in person, on the first of every month, to collect. On the nights when Doha could not pay, he had sat on the couch and made suggestions about things he could take instead, as temporary collateral. The piano had been the first thing he had mentioned. Doha had begged him not to take it. What they had worked out instead was something Soren did not fully understand, because Doha had made sure Soren was in her bedroom with the door closed every time Minho Guak came over. But Soren knew that her mother cried quietly for a long time after he left every month. 11 days before this particular Tuesday, Minho Guak had come by with another man, a younger man with a tattoo on his neck, and they had stood in the living room talking to Doha in low voices. After they left, Doha had walked into Sauron's bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, and she had said, "Baby, Mommy has to figure something out. I need you to be my big helper, okay?" And Sauron had said, "Okay, Mommy." And that night, Sauron had walked to the laundromat and written the sign in blue marker and taped it to the community board. Now, sitting on the carpet, Sauron looked up at the window. The sky outside had darkened into the early evening blue of late October, and on the coffee table, next to the bottle of fever reducer, there was a white envelope that had not been there that morning. Sauron had not noticed it when she came in. It was sitting at the corner of the table, propped up against the lamp, with no writing on the front. Plain white, unsealed. She stood up slowly and walked to the coffee table and picked it up. She opened the flap. Inside was a single folded piece of paper. She did not open the paper. She did not need to. She recognized the paper because she had seen it 3 times before. It was the kind of paper Minho Guak used for his notices. Sauron turned and looked at her mother. Doha was asleep. Her mouth was slightly open. Her breath was slow and even. She did not know the envelope was there. And Saurin, who was 7 years old, who had sold her bicycle for $38 that afternoon, who had climbed 4 flights of stairs with a grocery bag too heavy for her arms, stood in the middle of the living room holding an envelope she had not been meant to find, and she understood with the cold, quiet clarity of a child who had already learned too much that $38 was not going to be enough. Minho Guak was not the kind of man who kicked in doors. He had discovered early in his career that the doors of Bansong Flats opened for him on their own, because the people inside them had learned that refusing to open was more expensive than compliance. He had built a small empire out of the patience required to wait for people to break themselves. He was 51 years old. He had come to the United States in 1994 on a student visa he had allowed to lapse. He had purchased his first property in 2003, a 4-unit building on Yulji Street with 3 Korean widow tenants. When one of the widows could not pay, he had loaned her the difference at 20% weekly interest, and when she could not pay that either, he had taken her husband's wristwatch, and then her wedding ring, and then, eventually, the apartment itself. He had learned from that transaction that there was a specific kind of tenant who was profitable in ways the market did not recognize: widows, single mothers, the newly grieving, the chronically ill. By this autumn, Minho Guak owned 7 buildings in Bansong Flats, and 2 more in the adjacent neighborhood. He had 23 tenants on his loan program. He employed a younger man named Woo Young Ra, the one with the tattoo on his neck, whose job was to accompany him to collections and stand silently in doorways. Minho Guak had never been arrested. His loan agreements were verbal. His collections were cash. His threats were never articulated out loud, only implied through the careful arrangement of silences. He kept meticulous records in a leather ledger he carried in the inside pocket of his jacket. Next to the name Doha Jo, in the column reserved for valued objects, he had written 2 words: piano and daughter. He had not meant the second word in the way a monster might mean it. He was something worse. He was a man who had decided, somewhere along the way, that the suffering of others was simply a resource, and that extracting it efficiently was the work of a serious person. When he had written the word daughter in his ledger, he had meant that Dohajeo would surrender anything to keep her daughter safe. This was the architecture of the wound, not just the debt, not just the interest rate, not just the monthly visits. It was the patient strategic harvesting of a grieving woman's fear for her child, conducted by a man who wore good shoes and spoke politely and had never once raised his voice. On the Tuesday in question, Minho Guok had entered the apartment with the spare key Doha had given him 6 months ago as part of an arrangement Sarin did not know about. He had placed the envelope on the coffee table and left without waking Doha. The envelope contained a figure, $4,200, and a date, 7 days from today. And underneath the date, in smaller letters, a single sentence. If the full amount is not received by this date, alternative arrangements will be discussed with appropriate agencies regarding the welfare of the child. That was how Minho Guok threatened people. He threatened them with the appearance of concern. It was a bluff. He had no intention of calling anyone, because calling anyone would bring attention to his own operation. But a bluff did not have to be real to work. A bluff only had to be believed. 3 blocks away, in the back room of a restaurant called Sorai House, Jun Seo-ri was sitting at a small square table with a cup of barley tea that had gone cold. Across from him sat Tae-san, who was 47 years old, built like a retired wrestler. "The boy," Tae-san said. "I found him." "Tell me." 15 years old. Name is Hyunwoo Tan, works at the bicycle repair shop on the weekends. He saw the sign at the laundromat. He asked his aunt if he could buy the bicycle. His aunt gave him the money. Why did he want the bicycle? He already has a bicycle. He wanted this one because the sign said the mother was sick. He was worried about the girl. Jun Seo-ri looked into his tea for a long moment. So the boy is not the problem. No, the boy is a kind boy. Bring him here tomorrow, and tell him to bring the bicycle. Yes, Hyungnim. Tae-sun left the room. Jun Seo-ri sat alone at the small square table, and he allowed himself for the first time in 40 years to remember the courtyard. The courtyard had been behind a house in a neighborhood of Busan called Cheongsan-dong, and it had belonged to his maternal grandmother. There had been a stone well in the center of it, and a persimmon tree in the corner, and a wooden bench along the wall. His mother's name had been Boyoung. She had contracted tuberculosis that summer, and the medicine was expensive, and his father had been gone for 6 months at a stretch on a fishing boat. His older sister had been 12. Her name had been Narai. She had owned one beautiful thing, a jade hairpin their grandmother had given her for her 10th birthday, and one afternoon in late October, she had taken it to the pawn shop on the corner of Deokyeon Street, and she had sold it for the equivalent of $8 American, and she had bought medicine and rice and a small piece of beef that she had cooked into a soup for their mother. Junseo had been 7 years old that autumn. He had followed his sister home from the pawn shop without her knowing. He had watched her sit down on the wooden bench in the courtyard before she went inside, because she had not wanted their grandmother to see her face until she had composed it. She had wrapped her arms around her knees, and she had whispered 3 words into her own lap, over and over. "Do not cry, do not cry, do not cry." Junseo had stood at the gate watching her, and he had not gone to her, because even at 7 he had understood that she needed to do that part alone. And he had made himself a promise that day, not with words, but with his whole small body. Standing at the gate in the autumn wind, he had promised that when he grew up, he would find a way to stand between people like his sister and the world that had done this to her. He had forgotten that promise for a long time. Boyoung had died 6 months later. Narai had married a fisherman at 19 and moved to Jeju, and he had not seen her in 31 years. He himself had come to the United States at 22, had studied economics, had taught for 11 years at a small private college, and then had left that life and built the organization that he now ran. He had told himself, through every year of it, that the organization was a business. He had built the wall carefully. He had not allowed the courtyard to come back into his mind, because the courtyard belonged to a boy who had made a promise, and the boy who had made that promise would not have recognized the man Junso had become. But this afternoon, listening to a 7-year-old girl whisper 3 words into a paper grocery bag, the wall had not held. The wall had simply dissolved, as if it had always been made of paper, and he had only been pretending it was made of stone. Junseo-ri pushed the cold tea aside. He walked to the window. He took out his phone. He called a woman named Haeyeon Bon, who had been his personal attorney for 16 years. Haeyeon, I need you to look into a person. Minho Guak, landlord, Bansong Flats. He operates a private loan business. I want to know every building he owns, every tenant he has lent money to, and every bank account with his name on it. Timeline: 48 hours. Yes, Hyungnim. And Haeyeon. This one is not a business matter. There was a short pause on the other end of the line. She had worked for him for a very long time. She had never heard him say those words before. I understand, she said. He hung up. He stood at the window, and in his chest, for the first time in 40 years, a courtyard in Busan and a sidewalk in Bansong Flats existed at the same moment, overlapping the way 2 photographs overlap when they are held up together against a window in the light. The same 3 words in 2 different languages, 40 years apart. Do not cry, do not cry, do not cry. And somewhere in the quiet machinery of the city, a leather ledger in Min Ho-gwak's jacket pocket had just acquired a name he did not yet know was written in it. Not the name of a tenant, not the name of a debtor, the name of the man who had heard what he had done. The next morning, Junseo-ri stood at the window of his apartment on the 11th floor, drinking a cup of hot water with a slice of fresh ginger floating in it. He had not slept. Every time he had reached 40 in his counting, the courtyard had come back. At 5:45, his phone buzzed. It was Hyun Bon. 7 buildings confirmed. 23 active loans, interest rates between 35 and 55% weekly. The loan income goes into a safety deposit box at a credit union 40 miles north, under his wife's maiden name. 1 son, 17. Plays the cello. His partner is Woo Young Ra, 1 conviction for aggravated intimidation, on probation. His probation officer is a man named Kwang Ho Ma, who I believe you have met. I have met him. Guak has a meeting scheduled at 3 this afternoon at a coffee shop called Baekgyeon. He left Do-ha-jo an envelope yesterday. Junseo-ri closed his eyes. Cancel the meeting. I want her to sleep. I want her to eat. I want her to have one day in which Minho Guak does not exist. Can you arrange that without her knowing? I can. Do it. He hung up. He had crossed a line he had not crossed in 19 years. He had used the word want in a professional conversation. Men in his position used the word need. Want was a word for people who had allowed themselves to care about outcomes in a personal way. He had allowed himself to care. At 9:15, a black sedan pulled up to the curb outside the apartment building. Tyson was driving. Junseo-ri was in the back seat. He watched the entrance for the next 40 minutes, and at 9:56, Sorin-jo came out carrying a backpack that was too big for her. She had written a note for her mother, who had not woken up to see her leave. The note had said, in careful 7-year-old handwriting, I went to school. Mommy, I love you. Eat the apple for lunch. I put it on a blue plate. He did not follow her. Following her would have taught her that men in black cars watched little girls in pink windbreakers. She had already learned too many wrong things. He waited until 10:30, when he was certain she was in her classroom. Then he got out of the car and walked up the 4 flights of stairs at a pace slower than his body was capable of. The third-floor railing was loose. He noted it. He knocked 3 soft taps, spaced evenly, low on the door. For a long time there was no answer. Eventually he heard footsteps on the other side, slow and uneven, and the door opened 3 inches. Dohajio was standing in the gap. She was wearing a cardigan that had once been cream-colored and was now closer to the color of weak tea. Her eyes were the eyes of a woman who had not slept through a full night in a year. "My name is Junseo Ri," he said. His voice was low and calm. "I am not here to collect anything. I am not here to hurt you. I have left your daughter's bicycle in the hallway behind me. If you close this door right now, I will go away, and you will still have the bicycle. May I speak with you for 10 minutes? Doha looked past him. There, leaning against the opposite wall, was the pale blue bicycle with the white basket and the small silver bell. It had been cleaned. The chain had been oiled. A small red ribbon had been tied to the right grip. Doha made a sound that was more like a breath that had forgotten what it was doing halfway through itself. "How?" she whispered. "A kind boy bought it from your daughter yesterday. He was not the problem. The bicycle is yours again." "Who you are," she said. "I am a man who heard something yesterday that I was not able to walk away from. I would like to help you. If at any point in these 10 minutes you want me to leave, I will leave." She had been trained over the last year to read men. She looked at this man now, at the stillness of him, at the way he had given her the option to close the door first, and she found herself against every instinct she had built up, wanting to believe him. 10 minutes, she said. "Thank you." She opened the door. He did not sit down until she gestured at the chair by the window. "I know about the loan," Junseo said quietly. "I know about Minho Guak. I know about the envelope he left yesterday while you were asleep. I know that your daughter sold her bicycle for $38 to buy groceries. I am saying these things so that you do not have to spend any of our 10 minutes explaining them to me." Doha's hand went to her mouth. The tears fell. "Who you are," she said again. Junseo Ri did not answer for a long moment. Then he said, "I am someone who heard your daughter say 3 words yesterday that I heard my own sister say 40 years ago, in a courtyard on the other side of the world. She was 12. She had sold the one beautiful thing she owned to buy medicine for our mother. I stood at the gate and watched her, and I promised myself something that day that I forgot for a very long time. I am sitting in your apartment this morning because I remembered." "What you promised," she whispered. "I promised that if I ever had the power to stand between someone like her and the thing that was hurting her, I would not walk away." "We are fine," Doha said. She said it automatically. She had not meant to say it. "I know," Junseo said gently. "I know you are fine. You have been fine for a very long time. I am not asking you to stop being fine. I am asking you to let me help you with the man who has been using your fineness against you. I cannot pay anyone back. I do not have anything left. The envelope yesterday was about her, about my daughter. He said the word agencies. He will not call anyone. It is a bluff designed to make you surrender whatever you have left. He does not involve outside parties in anything, because outside parties would ruin the quiet little machine he has built. He is threatening you with a weapon he cannot actually fire." "How do you know that?" "Because I know how men like him build their machines. He is a small man operating a small machine. He has 7 buildings. He has 23 loans. He has a wife who does not know what he does. He has a son who plays the cello and does not know what he does. He has a partner on probation. He has a leather ledger in the inside pocket of his jacket. And he has, as of yesterday, no idea that any of this is now known to me. What you want from me," she finally said. "Nothing. I want you to eat a proper breakfast this morning. I want you to sleep this afternoon without listening for footsteps in the hallway. I want you to be here when your daughter comes home from school, and I want you to be able to stand up from the couch to hug her. That is what I want today. And I will handle Minho Guak. How? The less you know about that, the better. Doha began to cry in a way she had not cried in a long time. Not the quiet, ashamed crying she had done alone on the couch for the last year, but a full crying, with her face uncovered, her shoulders shaking. Junseo did not move from his chair. It was the sound of a woman finally allowed to put down something that had been too heavy to carry. When she had finished, she wiped her face with the sleeve of her cardigan, and she said, "Okay, okay, okay." He nodded once. At the door he turned. "When your daughter comes home today, please tell her that the boy who bought her bicycle changed his mind. Tell her he asked me to deliver it. Do not tell her about me. Not yet. Let her have the bicycle back the way a child should have something back. Without a shadow on it." Doha nodded. She could not speak. Junseo-ri walked down the 4 flights of stairs slowly. At the 3rd floor landing, he stopped. He took out his phone and sent a short text to Taesan. "Call someone to fix the railing at the 3rd floor landing this week. Quietly. No bill." Then he walked down to the street and got into the black sedan, and the pale blue bicycle stood leaning against the wall in the hallway of the 4th floor, waiting for a 7-year-old girl to come home from school and find it there, patient and red-ribboned and entirely unexplained. Sarin Jo walked home from school the long way that afternoon because her teacher had kept her after class. The teacher was Mrs. Ibarra, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes. She had noticed that Sarin had thrown her cheese sandwich in the trash on Monday. She had noticed that Sarin had fallen asleep twice during the morning reading hour. "Sweetheart," Mrs. Ibarra had said, kneeling down. "You know you can tell me anything, right?" Sarin had nodded. "Is your mom okay? She is a little sick. Is there food at your house?" Sarin had looked at her shoes. "I got eggs yesterday." "We had eggs." Mrs. Ibarra had pressed a granola bar into Sarin's hand. "For later," she had said. Sarin had taken the long way home because the question about food had made something inside her chest start to wobble. She walked until the wobbling had settled, and then she turned toward home. She climbed the 4 flights of stairs. She reached the 4th floor. She stopped. Leaning against the wall of the hallway, exactly where it would not have been if the world were a normal world, was her bicycle. The pale blue one, with the white basket, with the silver bell, with a small red ribbon tied to the right grip. Sarin did not move for a long time. She stood at the top of the stairwell with her hand still on the railing, and she looked at the bicycle the way a child looks at something that is not supposed to be possible. She looked at it for so long that she forgot to breathe. She dropped her backpack on the floor. She walked to the bicycle. She touched the silver bell once, and it rang, and the sound was the same sound it had made the morning her father had brought it home. The morning he had said, "You are a brave one. Sarin, baby, you are my brave one." She rang the bell 3 more times. Then she burst inside the apartment and she said, "Mommy, Mommy, Mommy, the bicycle. Mommy, look." Doha was on the couch. She had showered. She had eaten a bowl of rice with a boiled egg on top. She was sitting upright for the first time in 4 days. When Sarin came through the door, Doha stood up, and she stood up without wobbling, because she had decided that morning, quietly, that she was going to stand up when her daughter came home. Sarin ran into her arms. The boy, Mommy. The boy brought it back. A man told him to. "There is a ribbon on it, Mommy. A red ribbon." "I saw, baby. I saw." "Can I keep it?" "Yes, baby. It is yours. It has always been yours." Sarin pulled back and looked at her mother's face, really looked at it. And she saw something she had not seen in a year. She saw color. She saw attention. She saw the faint outline of a person who had remembered, for at least a moment, that she was still a person. "Mommy, you look better." I feel a little better, baby. Did you eat? I ate. All of it. Most of it. Sarin nodded with the serious satisfaction of a supervisor whose employee had finally turned in the correct paperwork. Good. You have to eat most of it, Dad used to say. I know what Dad used to say. Across the city, at the exact same hour, Minho Guak was walking into the coffee shop called Baekyeon on the corner of Ilji and 6th. He was 7 minutes early. He had told Woo Young-ra to wait outside. He ordered a cup of black coffee. He sat at the table by the window. He took his leather ledger out of his jacket and placed it on the table in front of him. At 2:59, the door opened. A woman walked in. She was not Do-ha-jeo. She was in her mid-40s, dressed in a charcoal pantsuit with her hair cut short. She walked directly to his table, and she sat down across from him without asking. Mr. Guak. My name is Hyeon Bon. I am an attorney. I am here on behalf of Do-ha-jeo. She will not be joining us today. Minho Guak's face did not change, but his left hand moved one finger. It tapped the ceramic saucer once. I am not sure I understand, he said. I will clarify. Mrs. Geo has retained my services. All future communication will be conducted through this office. She will not be meeting with you in person again. I am sure there has been a misunderstanding. Mrs. Geo and I have a friendly arrangement. I have reviewed the arrangement, Hyeon said. I would characterize it as a verbal loan at a weekly interest rate that exceeds the legal threshold in this state by a factor of approximately 11. I would further characterize your delivery of yesterday's envelope, in which you referenced agencies and the welfare of her child, as a communication that at minimum constitutes coercion. My office is preparing a complete documentary record of your lending operation, which includes your 7 properties, your 23 active loans, your partner's probation status, and the safety deposit box in Myeongwon, registered under your wife's maiden name. Minho Guak's single finger stopped tapping the saucer. I do not know what you are referring to, he said. I am certain that is the position you prefer to take at this moment. Take it. This meeting is not a negotiation. It is a notification. Effective immediately, the debt you are claiming against Do-ha-jeo is considered by my office to be void. You will make no further attempt to collect on it. You will not approach her building. You will not approach her daughter's school. You will surrender the spare key by end of business tomorrow. Minho Guak did not answer. His face had gone the color of old paper. Additionally, Hyeon said, opening a folder on the table, the gentleman I represent has taken an interest in the other 22 tenants on your loan program. Some of them will be receiving representation from my office on a pro bono basis. You will cooperate fully. You will not retaliate. You will finish your coffee. You will go home. You will think carefully. And tomorrow morning, you will deliver the key. Who is the gentleman you represent? Hyeon Bon closed her folder. The gentleman prefers not to be named. I will tell you only this. He is a man who heard a 7-year-old girl whisper 3 words into a paper grocery bag yesterday afternoon. He did not take the whispering well. I would not like to be the person who caused the whispering. She stood up. She walked out of the coffee shop. Minho Guak sat alone at the table by the window. His coffee had gone cold. His leather ledger lay on the table in front of him, looking suddenly, for the first time, like what it had always been underneath the pretense, a record of harm, a list of people he had used. He put the ledger back in his jacket with a hand that was no longer entirely steady. Outside, in the car at the curb, Woo Young-ra saw his partner's face through the coffee shop window, and for the first time in 3 years of working together, he understood that something had gone wrong in a way that was not going to be fixed by the methods he was accustomed to. 3 miles away, in the 4th-floor apartment with the piano against the far wall, Sarin Geo was sitting on the couch with her mother, telling her about the bell of the bicycle and how it still rang the same way, and how she was going to ride it to the park on Saturday if the weather was nice. Doha was listening, and Doha was holding her daughter's hand, and outside the window the October afternoon was settling into its early evening light. And somewhere in that light, the first tangible sign that the tide had turned was moving quietly through the city. Not as a storm, not as a siren. As a single attorney walking back to her car after a conversation that had taken less than 9 minutes and had rearranged the next 10 years of a little girl's life. Winter came early that year. The first snow fell on the 6th of November, 2.5 weeks after the afternoon at Baekyeon coffee shop, and by morning the neighborhood of Bansong Flats looked like a photograph of itself taken in a softer decade. The fire escapes were lined with white. The cracked asphalt of the lot behind Hamel Market had been smoothed over into something that looked, for the first time in years, clean. Doha Jo was standing at the window of the 4th-floor apartment at 7:15 in the morning, drinking a cup of tea, watching the snow. She had been drinking tea every morning for 12 days. It was a small ritual she had reclaimed. She had begun brushing her own hair again. She had begun taking the pills only in the amounts the doctor had actually prescribed. She had begun, slowly, returning to being a person. The piano had been tuned. A man named Bong Sok-an had come by one afternoon with a small leather case of tools and had spent 3 hours tuning it. And when Doha had asked him who had sent him, he had smiled and said only, "A friend who prefers to remain a friend." Doha had sat down at the piano the following morning and she had played for the first time in 14 months. She had played a children's arrangement of a Korean folk song called Arirang, and her fingers had shaken for the first 2 lines, and then they had stopped shaking, and she had played the rest of it clean. Sorin had sat on the carpet behind her and listened with her chin in her hands. When Doha had finished, Sorin had said, "Mommy, you still know how." And Doha had said, "I still know how, baby." The debt was gone. Min Ho Guak had delivered the key to Haeyeon Bon's office the morning after the coffee shop meeting. 3 days later, a small story had appeared in a local newspaper about irregularities in the lending practices of a landlord in Bansong Flats, and shortly after that, Min Ho Guak had sold 4 of his 7 buildings at reduced prices to a non-profit housing trust. Woo Young-ra had violated his probation by attempting to leave the state and had been returned to custody. Min Ho Guak himself had moved to a small apartment on the north edge of the city and had not been seen in Bansong Flats since. The other 22 tenants on his loan program had all received letters informing them that their debts had been reviewed and declared unenforceable. 11 of them had accepted pro bono legal representation. The rest had thrown away the letters they had been dreading and had eaten their first full dinner in a long time. None of them knew the name of the man who had set any of it in motion. They only knew that something had shifted. Sarin had not been told the full story. She had been told only that her bicycle had been returned, that her mother was getting better, and that the man who used to come to the apartment was not going to come anymore. She had asked her mother once why, and her mother had said, "Because a kind person helped us, baby." And Soren had nodded and not asked again, because at 7 years old she had already learned that some kindness came without a name attached. On a Saturday morning in mid-December, Sarin rode her bicycle in the parking lot of the park at the end of Ilji Street. The air was cold and clean. Doha sat on a bench wrapped in the green wool blanket, watching her. Doha had walked the 3 blocks to the park for the first time in over a year. Her legs had shaken on the way there. She had made it. Sarin was riding slow figure 8s around the parking lot, ringing the small silver bell every time she came around, and every time the bell rang, Doha laughed a small laugh from the bench, and every time Doha laughed, Sarin pedaled a little faster. A black sedan was parked on the far side of the street, half a block away. Inside, Junseo Ri sat in the back seat. Taesun was in the driver's seat. Junseo watched Sarin ride her figure 8s. He watched Doha on the bench. He watched the small silver bell catch the winter sunlight every time it rotated on the handlebar. He did not get out of the car. He did not want to be seen. This was not his moment. This was theirs. He had done what he had come to do. He had kept the promise the boy at the gate had made 40 years ago in a courtyard in Busan. He had stood between a small girl and the thing that was hurting her. He had done so without asking for anything. He had done so without ever letting her see his face. In the inside pocket of his coat, where another man would have kept a leather ledger, Yoon Seo-ri carried a single item. It was a piece of paper that Doha had given to Haeyeon Bon with a short handwritten note, asking if Haeyeon would please deliver it to the gentleman who did not wish to be named. The paper was a drawing. Soren had drawn it on the back of a math worksheet. It showed 3 figures standing in front of a tall building, a woman with long hair, a small girl with a pink jacket, a pale blue bicycle with a white basket. Above the figures, in careful 7-year-old handwriting, Soren had written 5 words. Thank you to the air. That was all. She had not known how to address it to a person, because she had not known there was a person. So she had addressed it to the air, because the air was what carried kindness when kindness had no other way to travel. Yoon Seo-ri kept the drawing folded in his coat pocket, and he understood, in a way he had not understood anything for a very long time, that he had received in those 5 words more than he had received in 40 years of careful silent living. He sat in the back of the sedan and watched the mother and daughter for another 3 minutes. Soren did one last figure 8, slower than the others, and then she coasted to a stop in front of the bench, and she stepped off the bicycle, and she climbed onto the bench next to her mother. Doha opened one side of the green wool blanket and wrapped it around Saurin, and the 2 of them sat pressed together, watching the bicycle stand in the cleared lot like a small blue signal of something that had been almost lost and was not lost anymore. Yoon Seo-ri turned his face away from the window. Taesan. Yes. Hyungnim. Home. Yes. Hyungnim. The sedan pulled away from the curb. It moved slowly down Yulji Street, past the laundromat where a community board now held a handwritten sign from a woman offering free piano lessons to children in the neighborhood, past Haymeel Market where the old man was sweeping snow from the entrance, past the corner where a 7-year-old girl had once whispered 3 words into a paper grocery bag. Yoon Seo-ri did not look back. Looking back was for men who were not sure they had done the right thing. He was sure. Somewhere behind him, on a bench in a park in Bansong Flats, a woman and her daughter sat under a green wool blanket and watched a pale blue bicycle in the snow, and neither of them cried because crying was for a chapter of the story that had ended, and a new chapter had begun. And in the new chapter there was a piano that played again, and a bell that rang again, and a door that locked from the inside, and a mother who stood up when her daughter came home from school. And far away, in the inside pocket of a dark wool coat, folded carefully in half, a drawing on the back of a math worksheet kept a promise that a boy had made a long time ago at the gate of a courtyard in the autumn wind. He had not looked away.